Thank you, Stephanie, for your invitation and introduction. And yeah, I am delighted to be able to contribute something to this remarkable and at this time, I think essential program. So yeah, hello and welcome to everybody. Um, as Stephanie mentioned, I have also been very passionate for many years about increasing awareness of the importance of our very early experience, starting from before birth, and how profoundly that influences us. And so listening to Stephanie's introduction, I have a few ideas of things I'd like to share with you. And, they're just the tip of the iceberg, of course, but a few things I think might be important by way of introduction. And I'll just say a few words about me, first of all, because my background really influences how I see things. And actually, I think Stephanie and I met um, probably just after I completed, or as I was completing my master's in somatic psychotherapy at Naropa Institute in what's now called Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado in the early 90s, and felt so inspired by what I had learned through that program about pre and perinatal psychology that I felt compelled to do a PhD in pre and perinatal psychology, which meant I had to create the program myself, basically, because there aren't any such programs. And there have been such programs for brief periods, but then they disappear. So hopefully that will change. But having a background in somatic psychotherapy, which has to do with movement and awareness of the body-centered psychotherapy, has really influenced how I see things. And it's impossible to work on a somatic level with therapy without running into very early pre-verbal memories and influences. And so that was a kind of cognitive introduction for me to this territory. I had already been finding that as a body worker, massage therapist, my clients were starting to birth themselves off my treatment table. And, the client and I both knew what was going on, and it was, quite dumbfounding, like how could that happen? And since then, I have also learned more about body work and specifically focused on craniosacral biodynamics or biodynamic craniosacral therapy. And a very subtle, mindful, fluid movement form called continuum, which was founded by my dear mentor, Emily Conrad. And in both biodynamics and continuum, we slow ourselves down and begin to find ourselves re-entering our original fluidity and having the possibility of connecting with, I think, what Stephanie calls original brilliance, I would call our original embryological potential. And you see how my body starts to move when I just think about it. So one of the ways we can learn about and connect with and also heal in relationship to our prenatal experience is through movement and somatic awareness. And part of that, what can be really helpful, is slowing down. So I'm going to take a breath here, and I invite you to join me in that. And perhaps just taking a moment to notice the breath in your body. And I notice I've put my hand over my heart area, and I invite you, if that feels good to you, to do so also. And if you like, and in continuum, we make different sounds that we directed to the tissues of our body. And I invite you, if you're interested, to make a little humming sound, where it's like you're offering the vibration of the hum to the tissues under your hand. You just allow that sound to go as long as your out breath naturally goes. And then, if possible, breathing in through your nose. If you want to slow down and settle your nervous system, breathing in through the nose is very helpful. You might be curious if you can feel the vibrations of the hum as you're humming. What other sensations you might be aware of? What happens with your breath? And then just letting yourself be for a minute or so, in what we call open attention and continuum, where we stop making the sound and just listen, being curious. How is your breath now? What else are you aware of in your body? Are there any interesting sensations? I notice that I feel warmer. It's quite cold here right now. This is November as I'm doing this. And you might notice my body started to move a little bit. I feel a bit more oceanic. You might find some sense of fluidity, melting, softening, spreading. And as we begin to slow down, we begin to naturally enter the territory of the embryo. As far as I know, embryos aren't rushing around all day trying to get to appointments or meet deadlines or get the next meal made or do the shopping or answer emails or texts or whatever it is that people are using these days. It keeps changing. They're just being in a very fluidic environment. They're floating and they're made up mostly of water. Right? So you might be curious what you sense when you begin to slow down. That might give you information about what it's like to be an embryo. One of the things that we find in somatic psychotherapy, as well as in prenatal and birth therapy and psychology, is that we seem to have to access memories of that early time through our bodies. You might not believe that we can have memories from that time. We don't have a brain, right? Our nervous system isn't developed. The brain, even though it develops before we're born, isn't fully functioning as it is in us. Although the embryo is a fully functioning organism, meeting the conditions around it perfectly. Or if it doesn't, it usually doesn't survive. So all of us have done that. Right? We have that brilliance, that intelligence, that potential within us to resiliently meet conditions that are constantly changing. Okay? The conditions for a sperm and an egg are different than for a blastocyst, as it's called, that is implanting into the wall of the womb. Are different than for a more grown, I want to say baby fetus that's getting ready to be born. The conditions vary, and the little one is intelligently adapting to those conditions and surviving. Some of the ways that we can identify very early memories are through how we hold our bodies. So, some people, it's not unusual to have a posture kind of like this, where one shoulder is up, one hip might be up. You can't see my hip, but there's some kind of a curve. One leg's a bit shorter than the other. Ask any chiropractor, they often say, oh, you have one leg shorter than the other. Well, it may not be that the leg is actually shorter, but there's a curve. And that curve, we find, can relate to the position that the baby was in the early stages of birth, when there were, or actually at any stage of birth, when the contractive forces were too much for them to process. Okay, little ones can be resilient, but conditions can be too much for them. One of the things I learned from craniosacral biodynamics is that there is always health present. And that's a basic osteopathic principle that's come down to craniosacral therapy. There's always health with a capital H, we can call it, always present. And what do we orient to? Do we orient to the health? Or do we orient to, oh, this hurts and that hurts, and this is a problem, that's a problem? Orienting to the health can serve as a resource and support us in being able to meet current conditions more easily. The little ones don't have the same kind of ability that we have to think about things and go, oh, okay, that would be healthier and that's not as healthy. They follow their impulses and they follow what's being presented. And they're remarkably receptive when people communicate to them and explain things to them. And so if the people around them can orient to the health, that can support the little one in doing so also. And kind of vice versa, us the big ones, those of us who have grown up already, we've already survived our time in the womb, and we have various issues. If nothing else, we have all the issues going on in our planet right now. And if we focus on the challenges, all the suffering in the world, it's hard to ignore right now, we can become overwhelmed. But, I'm reminded of Leonard Cohen. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets through. Can we orient to the light, the health? And one way to do that is to remember how we moved through various challenges before we were born. As throughout life, the little one in the womb moves through developmental milestones. And with each milestone, they're meeting a challenge. Okay, so I mentioned implantation into the uterine wall. And at that time, the embryo has to find a source of food or they starve. But they have the ability, or those of us who survived had the ability to connect, to reach out to mother, to send her messages, and to actually literally reach into and eat into the uterine wall and create a connection with her that will give them food, access to her blood. And that's a whole story in itself, but that's just an example. If they meet that milestone, they can go on to develop further. And we've all done that. So we can consider that we've all been born, we've all made it this far. That takes a lot of resilience on our part. That takes a lot of intelligence. Well, let me just mention a few other somatic signs. The way, as I'm gesturing this way just now, gestures. So people often gesture in ways that relate to their experience. So for example, how often have you experienced this, or have you seen others go, oh, I feel totally stuck. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. I can't get out of this situation. And they'll put their hand somewhere here, similar to where they met forces at birth, where probably they felt stuck. That's a memory. I find it really fascinating that people who experience shame tend to be more hunched over like this. And shame can relate to our experience of being welcomed, being accepted, being worthy, valuable. And from what I can tell from my clients and my students, and myself actually, that experience of shame can begin as early as the developmental milestone we call discovery, which is the beginning of the 4th week, usually, when the pregnancy is discovered. Usually it's defined as the time when the woman has a pregnancy test and realizes she's pregnant. These days that can happen earlier, but it still often happens at that time because, there's the realization, I've missed my period and, maybe. So then she does the pregnancy test. And that's the time when the heart is developing. And we actually have folded over as an embryo very intelligently, creating a form. We fold it over and we're kind of in this shape. And, excuse me, if at that time the parents or one or both of the parents are shocked or horrified, or you have thoughts about getting rid of the child in some way, are other than welcoming, that's shocking for the little one. And that's the ultimate danger for them because they're totally dependent on being welcomed. They're completely dependent. So, again, my hand goes here. This is where we tend to experience welcome or lack. So these are examples of nonverbal, pre-verbal memory. We also call implicit memory, which doesn't require a brain and nervous system. And it's not something that is naturally put into words. It's something that's remembered in the body, even in the cells. And so we look at that very early memory. People report experiences from conception, when they're a unicellular organism. How can that be? But think about cells and their function. Cells are intelligently interacting with whatever their environment is. Okay? We would not survive. Speak of resilience. We would not be here if our immune cells didn't have memory. They need to be able to recognize what's safe and what's a threat, and to remember what's a threat, so that next time it comes along, they can be prepared to deal with it. Okay, that's been a very big topic in the news the last few years with the pandemic. Our immune system needs to remember. The cells are remembering. The cells are detecting what's going on. And if you, well, you probably don't have the chance, but if somebody pokes a unicellular organism, it withdraws. If a toxic chemical is put into the fluid that the unicellular organism is in, they withdraw. That's an intelligent response, the same response that little ones have in the womb. Little ones have been seen on ultrasound during amniocentesis, when a needle is being put in to the uterus. Little ones have been seen trying to bat the needle away or to pull away from it. They're obviously aware of it, even though they can't see at that time with their eyes, somehow they sense it and they know it doesn't feel good. They move away from it. Okay, that's an intelligent response. And it's because we had so many intelligent responses from the time we were unicellular all the way through birth and beyond. What's beyond might be more obvious to you, but even before birth, we are very intelligent beings, interacting intelligently, resiliently, I might say, with our environment. And we're learning about the environment we're going to be moving into, usually our mother's environment. So little ones in the womb experience their mother's world in several ways. And one is directly through various chemicals, hormones that come to them, like stress hormones, for example. If the mother is facing extreme stress or chronic stress, the child will have an altered response to stress throughout their life. They've learned to be ready for the stressful world that their mother lives in. And there are many other examples of how prenates are learning about their mother's world and are prepared for it in various ways biologically. In therapy, we also encounter people describing explicitly their experiences of various emotional experiences. And often it's the mother's emotion, like say she's feeling bad about herself, she's feeling sad. Maybe she's just lost somebody that's dear to her and she's feeling a lot of grief. The little one experiences that grief, but they probably don't have the context for it. So they just experience it directly. And what we know about little ones is that they don't have the ability, like we do, to differentiate between what's theirs and what's someone else's. They just experience it directly. They also don't have the ability to differentiate between then and now. The nature of implicit memory, the nonverbal memory, is that when something triggers it, something in current time triggers it, it feels like it's happening now. So whatever might have been dangerous back then, something similar, something reminds my system of that, I go into fear now. And it feels like the situation now is dangerous, even though it may not be at all. And in that state, it's hard to perceive safety. So one way that I find really helpful to work with this, besides developing awareness and, looking at what our own history might have been, and there are various ways to do that. And part of that is through being aware of your own implicit memories coming up. So that's a mindfulness practice, as I see it. Being able to mindfully observe when I'm triggered by something, when I'm having a really strong emotion that seems to come out of nowhere, or it's more intense than is appropriate for the actual situation. If I'm being mindful, I could have the ability to say, oh, that's a really strong emotion, and this is what's happening. Maybe that's an implicit memory. Maybe that's how it felt back then. So then it can give me information about how I might have felt back then. And I can orient to now. This is, 2023. I'm this age that I am now. I'm not an embryo right now. And we can take it a step further. What I love to do is to meet our inner little one. And so I invite you to just take a moment right now, if you're interested, to consider the little one that you were and just see what comes to you. I've mentioned a few milestones, so you might have a sense of yourself before you were born, or maybe it's later. And just having a sense, whatever comes to you, of that little one that you were and what they might have been experiencing. And if that's a stretch for you to imagine, that's okay. Doesn't hurt to stretch our imaginations, be curious, see what comes to you. And just for a moment, considering what would that little one need or want? And you might even have enough of a sense of them to ask them that, or to pose the question and see what comes to you. Is there something you would like to offer that little one just now, as the adult that you are? What might you offer them? And that might be some kind of reassurance. Wow, I know it's hard, but we made it. I know you weren't welcomed back then, but I really welcome you now, and I really love you. And I'd like to hold you. I like to hold my little one in my heart, and she seems to like it there. Well, I know she likes it there. And notice what happens inside you when you just take a moment to offer something to this little one. One possibility is that you begin to sense, again, some slowing down, some melting, more space, more settledness, your nervous system settling. You might begin to have more of a sense of the health, the brilliance, the potential, or what we call in biodynamics, and in pre and perinatal, the original blueprint. You know, like if an architect is designing a building, they draw a blueprint first, and then it's built according to the blueprint. Well, it seems we have some kind of energetic, intelligent blueprint that our cells and tissues follow in order to form this. Like, how do they know how to do this? You know, from one unicellular organism into these complex bodies. That's incredible potential and intelligence. So I invite you to let yourself be curious about what you sense as the health just now within you. And that might be a good place to pause for now, just being with that. So thank you for your time, your attention, and thank you again, Stephanie. And I look forward to seeing where all this goes. So thank you.